Welcome. We're here to talk about tools and strategies for strengthening educator preparation programs. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Christina Gregory of the Association for Advancing Quality in Educator Preparation, or AAQEP, to discuss how Praxis licensure test data can be used as part of your evidence for meeting AAQEP standards. So, Dr. Gregory, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a good day when we can talk about how providers can leverage whichever measures they have to determine the quality of their candidates. So I'm excited to be here with you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Praxis tests are often one of the few standardized measures, right, that are available to educator preparation programs. How can Praxis scores help demonstrate that program completers possess the foundational knowledge that is outlined in AAQEP Standards 1 and 2?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I just want to start off that, as you mentioned, being a national measure, any of those have the benefit to enable a program to say, hey, look at how well our candidates are doing, not only in our program across our state, but then again nationally. So that's a nice benefit, right, that these exams can give. In terms of making the case for Standards 1 and 2, providers are asked to bring forth, obviously, a variety of measures. And so there's a overall indicator of competency, professional knowledge, and skills that can be used through these exams in making the case, but then also looking at the category scores. When you break them down, there's some nice alignment between a number of aspects of Standards 1 and Standard 2, so that providers can really bring forward a very clear case for quality for those aspects. So I'm thinking about instructional planning might be one, language development, or even technology use. Developing positive classroom environments are some of the examples where providers might be able to show that alignment in their candidates' scores.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, AAQEP emphasizes that evidence should reflect candidates' ability to support student learning and development, right? And Praxis is a test, not a classroom observation. So how do you recommend that EPPs frame those data for their evidence?
Sure. So let me back up and say, one of the things about AAQEP's system is that in terms of our evidence requirements and priorities is that we ask for multiple measures, because no one measure can tell you all the things, just kind of like you just demonstrated there. And we ask for multiple perspectives, because when we bring together a variety of measures, we really can make a stronger case than if we were trying to provide evidence using one measure alone. And so not only does this lend itself to making a compelling case for quality, but it also allows providers to dig in and say, maybe we have a gap here. Maybe we can attend to this and strengthen what we're doing in terms of preparation. Licensure scores are a required part of our system as well. And so again, having all of these components come together, that triangulation really is strengthening the case for quality that providers make when it comes to talking about their candidates' performance. So I love how together we have this really strong, coherent story. So even though, yes, it's talking about their content readiness, right? Measures are still being brought in by the provider to look at that those direct measures of performance in the classroom to really make a sound case.
Right, yeah, that triangulation is so important.
It definitely is.
Yeah. So AAQEP encourages providers to look at performance across different groups of candidates as well, right? So how can disaggregating Praxis data add value here?
This is a fantastic question, and one that I get really excited about, because digging into data is where the fun begins, right? When we look to see if there are disparate outcomes, regardless of if it's at the certificate level, digging in more so into category scores in the content, or it's across the demographics of the candidates that you serve, you can learn something really exciting about your program. It can be, hey, we're going to keep on keeping on because things are looking great, and so the things that we put in place we're going to continue with. But it could also be, what's happening here? Trends are indicating this. What do we need to do about it, and what might explain it, right? So I think, data is power in terms of being able to learn more about programs and leveraging that. And I know your EDM tool is one fantastic way that providers can leverage the data that's coming from the Praxis exams. So at AAQEP, we asked, because this is so important, we ask our members to disaggregate their data by license level and location and modality. Right? You want to know if our face-to-face programs are, our candidates are being served in the same way as our online programs, right? But being able, as I mentioned, to disaggregate this data allows you to identify disparate outcomes and allows you to identify gaps, right? And then we make way for continuous improvement, which I think then opens the door for innovative practices, right, that programs can engage in, all in spirit of being in service to their candidates and preparing them for these very important roles of going out and educating our students in P-12 schools. So the other important thing that providers can do in looking at their Praxis data, and I think your EDM tool is crucial in this, is really digging into characteristics of their candidates. And so maybe you can remind me, what are those great tools, right, that you have in the way that providers might leverage the EDM?
Sure. So ETS's Data Manager, or EDM, allows for quick and custom reports, two different types of reporting functionality. And with those, you can disaggregate by multiple variables, so demographic characteristics, location, et cetera. But then also you can aggregate across years, so across 1 year, 3 or 5 years. And that's helpful for when a provider runs up against that challenge maybe of a small sample size for maybe a smaller program or something like that, right? And so being able to aggregate across years might get you up to that threshold of a sample size, whether it be 10 or what have you.
Yeah, so I love the ability to be able to do that, right? Because providers can learn so much in keeping with their own context and mission about what's important in serving the candidates that they bring to their programs. And all of this work is in service to continuous improvement, right? And that's where providers leverage their unique contexts and face challenges and hopefully bake them into opportunities to support the candidates that they're serving.
That's so true. So that leads us actually into talking about Standard 3, which focuses on program quality and capacity, right? So where does Praxis data fit into effective internal quality control systems?
All right. I get really excited about program practices because this is where a provider can showcase it's great work. And it's also where the program comes alive, right? Everything stems from their ability to have a great internal quality control system, which not only is that quality assurance system, but that subset of the assessment system. And so we know that assessment systems only work well if they are using trustworthy data. And so having well-documented data quality measures to inform folks' decision making is very powerful. If you don't have credible data, then you're not making sound decisions, right? And so not only does Praxis data come in to that assessment system, right? Having quality characteristics of that measure being investigated, but we also ask in our program practices of our providers to demonstrate how they have been able to look at a candidate's progression. So from the time that they're recruited, admitted, onboarded, and monitored, but behind all that, how are they supported? And so we invite programs to either conduct an internal audit using a series of probes. So it might be benchmarks that they use as a candidate progresses through the program to identify, are all candidates being successful, right, throughout the program? Or we ask them to maybe delve in and conduct a focus investigation. But all of this is in the spirit of, it's not just, right, oh, well, all of our candidates, right, pass through the program and they all pass their licensure exam scores, but it's the further digging in of, but are all of them really being successful, right? Are they all being equitably served? And so again, going back to how you disaggregate the data if you conduct an audit and you're using test scores or you're using the category scores even to dig in more deeply, can really be telling about how different groups of candidates are moving through the program. And that allows, right, this is where the magic happens, that allows a program then to go in and say, okay, this is what we know. How can we go ahead and fix it? Let's implement a solution, and then let's go back again and audit and see, did that actually work? And again, all of this is in support of candidate success.
So it's that cycle of continuous improvement, right?
Yes, it never ends. It's ongoing, right? And I think, the more that providers can see how this is a routine, it's a cycle, it's just what we do, and building that culture of continuous improvement by using data to inform their decision making, wow, right?
Yeah.
It's just exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Agree. So in that vein, can you share some examples of program improvements that you've seen driven by Praxis data?
Sure. As we mentioned, I think a little while ago, there is having an exam that can say, hey, our completers have met the state criteria for success, for competency to go off and be teachers or go off and be principals, whatever it might be, their job in our field, is really, really exciting as a confidence booster, right, for that program. But the program can also say, well, hey, let's dig in, let's see where we're doing. Maybe we didn't quite meet that in one category or maybe for one area of licensure. So I've seen programs where they've identified maybe a gap and they've gone through and they've gathered a bunch of resources, some that ETS may have offered, other resources that they have internal to the program, and they've created like a little test prep center. So it's a one-stop shopping resource for their candidates so that candidates aren't going here and there and everywhere to find what they need. Another provider also talked about how they decided to try to help kind of take some of the anxiety which they think was coming through on a test, right? We know candidates face that all the time. It's high stakes for them. They were able to introduce a question at the end of every methods course, right? And that just brought the anxiety down. So they had this familiarity with the exam and were able to, repeatedly help candidates just say, let's take the fear out of this. You got this. You know the content. Yes, the practice part of it. Another provider talked about how they were able to review the trends in their Praxis data. And so that would allow them to tweak, again, at that category level is really meaningful because you can really pinpoint, right, what's happening and where you need to course correct in instruction. And so that informed their curriculum, right? They were able to say, okay, we need to really beef up maybe a little bit more here. Or maybe it's looking across the scope and sequence of the program. And you say, let's introduce this a little earlier. Let's come back to it here. And then, all right, we've done our work. We've given that content numerous times to try to reinforce for success. The other neat part of this is oftentimes content faculty that are teaching, I'm going to say secondary education, right? You've got math majors, English majors, science majors. Using the category scores, the scoring in the EDM allows teacher prep folks to go and talk to their colleagues and say, hey, do you think you might be able to help reinforce X, Y, and Z, right? Sometimes there's a gap between what is being done in content for that, BA or BS and what is expected of that teacher candidate. So I think that's another lovely use that providers have been able to take advantage of in leveraging their data from those test scores.
Yeah, those are great ideas. Those are great ideas that I think can be applied for educator preparation providers across the country. So yeah, thank you for those examples. How does AAQEP view the use of Praxis data for showing evidence of program quality across multiple years?
Oh, I'm getting excited again talking about more data, right? We feel very strongly that when you've got a couple of years of data, usually 3 is kind of the magic number, right? 3 cycles, 3 cohorts, 3 years, whatever you're measuring, that's when you begin to see trends. And 3 is great because when you could go a little bit longer than that if you wanted to, but all of our programs are dynamic. They're always changing. we don't want it to be the same program you had 5 years ago as you do today, right? You need to be able to be flexible and pivot and adapt to all sorts of things. And so 3 is really a nice, a number to show those trends. So not only can that demonstrate sustained quality over time, right? But it also allows providers very quickly to notice, oh, Houston, we have a problem, right? Like, what happened? All of a sudden, social studies candidates just bombed this. Like, what's going on? Let's dig in. And the beauty of providers being able to share their story and their self-study work alongside their data is that they can give context to that, right? Oh, all of a sudden, state standard changes came along and we had to pivot really quickly and we haven't been able to, align everything. Or whatever is going on that may have occurred. Obviously, we saw during the 2020 pandemic, there was lots of, all of a sudden we switched abruptly. Everything is online. It's no longer face-to-face and it takes a while, right? Online instruction, that pedagogy is going to be very different than when you're sitting face-to-face with your candidates. So I think, being able to quickly look at data, right, that trend data, and then make some adjustments is really a very nice way of leveraging being able to see, okay, year after year, how are our candidates doing? And again, all in the spirit of continuous improvement.
Sure, yeah, exactly. So for programs that feel that perhaps their praxis data is limited or inconsistent, right? Sometimes that happens. How can they still use it effectively for AAQEP evidence?
This is a wonderful question. And it makes me think of the artist Seurat, right? So all the little dots. And if you're up close, you're like, oh, little dot. But when you step back, this beautiful picture emerges. And so when providers are bringing forth their data in their self-studies, so test scores, teacher performance assessment, dispositions rubric, whatever it might be, it's only one half of the story. Right. The other half of the story, all those dots, right, Bobby, with all these little dots, come from the site visit itself and the discussions with all the various stakeholders, both internal and external to the program. So yes, it may not be the perfect data that you want in terms of, because we have intermittent enrollment, but aggregate that data over time till you get to an N of 10 maybe. That gives you some confidence in the inferences you can make from that data, but it's part of the story, right? And so acknowledging that, right? Say, hey, dear reader, in your self-study, we only have this much, but this is what we have. It's still telling a part of that story. And so I would say, that's fine, right? Again, going back to those multiple measures can really complement one another, allow for that compelling narrative, and also allow for providers to dig in where they're saying, well, this is coming in strong, but this isn't over here. What's going on, right? That sense making, I think, is really exciting, and digging in and figuring out what may be undergirding what's happening.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. How can praxis data speak to comparison points for providers?
So I think in a couple of ways, right? If they are looking at programs, right? If we're saying, let's see how our LED candidates are faring against our secondary candidates, right? So you've got that program to program. You might even dig in with courses, right? And figure out at that grain size. If you bring it up, you can leverage those scores to say, hey, let's look at how we're doing with the other providers in our state, right? How are we shaking out? Because that can be a bragging point for a program, right? We want providers to celebrate the quality of their programs and their candidates. And then finally, nationally, right? Being able to compare across the board. I mean, that really gives programs a sense of confidence about the work they're doing, if they're excelling in that way. But it also might say, hey, what's at play? Like maybe we don't like how we shake out. So let's dig in a little. Again, all in the spirit of continuous improvement. It's not seen as competition. I truly believe that as a field, we are stronger when we work together. And we know we don't have enough teachers, right, in our classrooms today. And so, if if looking at those comparisons helps us step up our game a little bit more, that's great too. And if it doesn't, but what are the other measures then that are telling the story, right? Again, no one measure tells us all the things. And we know that there are challenges that face programs and candidates on a daily basis, but it's kind of neat to think about how we might leverage all of the measures, all of the tools in our empirical toolkit, you know, if it were, or toolbox, to help us guide program improvement, foster innovation, and again, at the end of the day, just produce quality candidates for our schools.
Yeah. And it really speaks to the power of diversity of types of programs too, right? And what they all bring to the table in preparing effective educators and using data across that variety.
For sure, for sure.
Yep. Well, Dr. Gregory, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure, and it's clear that when analyzed thoughtfully, praxis data can be used as a valuable tool for strengthening programs, right, and improving candidate success and meeting AAQEP standards. So again, and used alongside other evidence, it helps to tell a powerful story of quality. So again, thank you so much for spending your time with me and for sharing your thoughts and insights.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.